Okay, welcome. Got it. I'm Corinne with the Fair Housing Project, and you are joining us for our, let's see, I'm sorry, I'm like a little distracted with my Facebook Live button. You are joining us for our second Fair Housing Friday of the month. We have a great set of panelists. I'm going to let Nate introduce in just a second here. But I do want to let you all know that you're joining us for the Fair Housing Friday. That is a part of a series that we're doing for Fair Housing Month. We do have over 30 people registered for this event. So you'll notice that we invited you into this room muted, and we ask that you do stay muted until the Q&A portion of this webinar. And then we also do try and leave a good amount of time at the end for your questions. So as we listen to our guest panelists, be thinking about if there are any questions or things that you would like to hear more about, and feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. And I'll be moderating helping moderate the Q&A as well. And just to give an overview of fair housing, since it is Fair Housing Month, and we want to make sure that you all walk away with at least a small understanding of what fair housing is. The Fair Housing Project is a project of Champlain Valley of economic opportunity. We are part of the housing advocacy team, which includes the mobile home program, which Nate, our facilitator, is representing, and Vermont Tenants, most popularly known for our Vermont Tenant Hotline, but also for our free Vermont Tenants education. So lots of information there. I will be putting a link to our programs in the chat. And then each April, we recognize the 1968 passing of the Fair Housing Act, which put into law essential protections, making it illegal to discriminate in rental, sale, or financing of housing based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, family status, and disability. Each state has the opportunity to expand on those protections, and here in Vermont, we have, based on our community's needs. So in Vermont, age is also protected, as well as marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, receipt of public assistance, denial of development permitting based on income of prospective residents. Sorry, that one's a bit of a mouthful. Victims of sexual abuse, stalking, or sexual assault. And I think I covered them, our state protections. I will say that we do a quite extensive fair housing workshop and we also include our fair housing education in our Vermont Tenants workshops as well. So there's always opportunities to dig deeper there. But what this means is that it's against the law for you to be treated unfairly based on your membership of any of the federal or state protected classes. And just to say quickly, discrimination is not always obvious and can take very many forms. It can happen when the landlord refuses to rent to you an apartment, the most kind of telltale sign, but also maybe when they say it's apartment's unavailable when it's vacant, or when they set terms and conditions in your lease that's different than other tenants that they're renting to. And again, we do cover a lot of this information in our Vermont Tenants workshop. At the end of this presentation, there will be lots of space for questions. Again, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I can't emphasize enough, we have a lot of other free fair housing events happening throughout the month that are available in our events calendar. I'll also link to that in our chat. And at the end of this workshop, we will be sending a follow-up blog post that will include this recording, as well as all the different resources we touch on today. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Nate so that you can go ahead and introduce our moderators. And I think I can switch the view so that it's on speaker view and we're not looking at so many empty boxes. Okay, take it away, Nate.
All right. Thank you, Corinne, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight, or today. It's not tonight, it's 12:30. What time is it? My name is Nate Lantieri, and I'm one of the resident organizers with the mobile home program at CVOEO. And I'm really excited to be joined by some great panelists today. Three folks that have a lot of different, a lot of knowledge about the mobile home landscape in Vermont, kind of coming from some different perspectives. So I'll introduce him now, and then, I'll kind of go into a brief preamble of basically some of the places we may go in this conversation. And then, we're going to save some time at the end for some questions. So keep them writing them down, add them to the chat at any point, and we'll try and get to them. So I'll start with introductions. So we'll have myself as a moderator, Nate Lantieri with the Mobile Home Program. We have Kelly Hamshaw, who is a senior lecturer with the Community Development and Applied Economics Department at the University of Vermont and one of my former professors. This is very cool. We have Elise Shanbacker, who is the Executive Director of the Addison County Community Trust, who is the owner of several mobile home parks in the Addison County area. And we have Gayle Pezzo, who is the board president for the Westbury Homeowners Association, which is a cooperatively owned mobile home park in Colchester with approximately 250 households. So really excited to be joined by all these fine folks. And we'll kind of get into the bulk of this and really, why are we all here? Why are mobile homes part of the affordable housing conversation in Vermont? A lot of times folks may not even consider it to be an option when we're thinking about the future of affordable housing. And we can kind of start out with what the conditions are on the ground right now. So in Vermont, there are 236 parks, mobile home parks throughout the state, ranging from 3 homes to 300 homes, with a lot of different kind of characteristics and some that are very similar in between parks. Within those 236 parks, there are 7,000 households that are primarily going to be homeowner occupied households, where the owner of the home also rents the land from the park. In those parks, there are really 3 kinds of different ownership models. There's the standard, a private entity owns the park, kind of similar to a tenant-landlord relationship with some extra caveats. And then in the past 40 years, since 1989, there have been the options for housing provider nonprofits to purchase parks when they go for sale, as well as for residents to actually explore the concept of becoming resident owners of their park. So in that time, there have been 68 parks that are now considered to be nonprofit owned or cooperatively owned, 18 of those being co-ops. So that's kind of the general, that's the number of mobile homes that exist in the state. So why are they important? Well, as I kind of mentioned before, they're a really great opportunity for home ownership in Vermont. We hear time and time again that the options for middle income people to become homeowners in Vermont are dwindling faster and faster. Mobile homes, by some nature of them, they provide an on-ramp for folks to be able to go into homeownership when, without needing to buy a multiple $100,000 home. Multiple $100,000 home. Additionally, with their ownership status, the rent that is required for mobile homes is significantly cheaper than pretty much any apartment that you can find in the state. The going rate for a 1-bedroom in Chittenden County might be $1,200 right now. The going rate for a mobile home rent per month, even higher. Yeah, it's probably actually higher than $1,200. In Chittenden County, the lot rent per month for a mobile home, which could be a 3-bedroom home, might be $400. So these are an essential piece of the affordable housing landscape, both in terms of renting and owning. A lot of times, a big barrier in terms of how we continue to promote this is just the stigma, this old stigma of, mobile home parks as some other place that, they're not for people like us. And in reality, we find that these are very strong communities with people that are engaged, people that want to work with their neighbors, people that, want to just live in an affordable way in Vermont. So that's kind of my introduction to this landscape. With a lot of, with any kind of specific housing type, there are some unique challenges, but also unique opportunities. So, some of the potential areas we're going to go through this conversation are looking at some of the funding challenges for mobile home parks and looking at, how they can receive funds from the state and local governments. Infrastructure. A lot of these parks were built, 60 years ago, and the pipes have not been replaced, and they weren't that good when they were put in the first place. So, a lot of these infrastructure systems are aging at the same time. How are we going to work with that? We're going to look at some of that stigma that I was mentioning and how that impacts communities still to this day. And specifically how there can be some, both physical but also political distance in between, decision makers in a town or in the state and residents in a mobile home park. The other two pieces we're going to look at are some home repair challenges. As I was mentioning, a lot of these parks are older and a lot of the homes are older. And a lot of the folks that live in these homes are older and may not have the funds to get their home into a safe and healthy way. So, that's going to be a challenge in looking at the long-term sustainability of them. And then finally, looking at some of these longer-term risks. In early 2010s, a lot of the Vermont housing landscape was rocked by Hurricane Irene, and mobile homes in particular were. And we've looked at a lot of the impacts of flooding and the long-term sustainability of them in this, post-Irene era. What steps need to be taken so that these communities stay safe, stay healthy, and can avoid these natural disasters. So that's kind of where I'm going to start it out. And why don't I pass it over to my panelists, and who would be first alphabetically? I think that would be Elise. So Elise, why don't you start us out? Just kind of give a 5-10 minute introduction on kind of where you come into this perspective and kind of really anywhere you'd like to take it.
Hey, thanks, Nate. Well, I'll talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about ACCT, and give an overview of some of the major challenges that we are addressing right now in our mobile home parks. So as Nate mentioned, I'm Elise Shanbacker. I'm the Executive Director of the Addison County Community Trust. I've been in this role since 2015, but I actually first got involved with ACCT back in 2006 when I was a student at Middlebury College and decided to write my thesis on social capital in mobile home parks, and interviewed residents at Lindale Mobile Home Park in Middlebury, which is a 67 unit park, and wrote about really how that community is first and foremost a neighborhood like any other neighborhood, with really diverse people from diverse backgrounds, some people who were living there for a very long time and loved the community and had really strong connections with their neighbors, to people who were really just passing through. So that was sort of my big takeaway, is really, while on the surface they may have some unique challenges and unique opportunities, at their heart they're really just like any other neighborhood. So in terms of ACCT and our role now in the mobile home park landscape, we own 9 mobile home parks ranging from 9 to 73 units, with a total of 340 home sites, about 5 of which are currently vacant and sort of unable to be turned over without major reinvestment in the infrastructure on the site. Infrastructure is the big challenge in our mobile home parks right now. But that said, prior to this year, we've been focusing on infrastructure for a long time. Last year, we did make a lot of progress on the financial stability of the mobile home parks. Mobile home parks do not have access to a whole lot of subsidy. I think it's great that we're a nonprofit and to have nonprofitly owned mobile home parks, but that doesn't mean that we have some funding source that can be put into the parks to make them more affordable necessarily. We collect lot rent every month, and that is the money that the park has available to pay for its expenses. And because lot rents are relatively low, but parks can have very costly infrastructure needs, that's a big challenge with maintaining and operating mobile home parks. That said, last year we were able to access some tax exempt financing through the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, which was an amazing resource for us. And refinancing the parks at least reduced the amount of that lot rent, the share of that lot rent every month that was having to go towards paying for the mortgage on the park, which means more money is available for maintenance. So that was a big milestone for us. Right now, we are working on addressing failing septic systems in Lindale, the park that I mentioned in Middlebury. We've gotten some major funding from USDA Rural Development, as well as the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, Community Development Block Grant, and some others in there. At the end of the day, it's going to cost over $2 million to put in a new septic system for these 67 residents. Meanwhile, if you have the privilege of living in a neighborhood that is on town water and town sewer, you might pay a sewer bill that might be $1,000 a year or so. In this case, we have a very costly septic system upgrade that can only be spread across 67 end users, which in the case of Lindale have a median household income of $35,000 a year. So we're really trying to pursue as much grant funding as we can to reduce the impact on lot rent. But the reality is some of that financing is going to include debt. And that gets passed on to the residents. So dealing with these infrastructure challenges are definitely going to impact affordability, but at the same time are necessary to keep the parks sustainable as well as safe and healthy. Obviously, having surfacing effluent in people's yards or septic systems that back up into washing machines is not an acceptable standard of living. So, Lindale is just one project. We are embarking on planning for another community septic system. We hope, if it's feasible, even up in Starksboro. We probably have 3 or 4 other parks that also need a wholesale redevelopment of their individual on-site septics, which, as Nate mentioned, a lot of the infrastructure dates from when these parks were built in the 60s. So they have cesspools and leaching tanks. I didn't even know what that was when we found the first one that we didn't know about, and all sorts of systems that you couldn't build today, and are very hard to build. These parks are located on sites where it's very difficult to build anything today. You wouldn't be able to put the park there today. So that's a big constraint that we face. And then overall capacity. We've gotten pretty far down the road on this project with Lindale and hope to, go out to bid soon and break ground this summer and get that system replaced this summer. And now are realizing that the electrical in the park, the electrical systems is also something that's going to need to be addressed, and conduit put in, and another very expensive project. But we worked with a civil engineer on the project, and civil engineers cover a certain set of systems, and electrical systems are a different set of engineers and a different scope. So to have somebody who's a developer who can bring together all of those different pieces of the project and figure out, okay, this clean water fund can pay for the septic, but this VHCB money can pay for the electric, that's very challenging. And there aren't a lot of people in the state who even know how to or have the capacity to do that. And the last thing I'll say before I leave it there for the next panelist is I'm really excited to answer questions, but also really excited because I think our property manager, Chris Allette, is also in the audience on this call, and she is the property manager for all 9 of those parks with all 340 units, and knows so much more about the day-to-day of what's going on in our parks than I do. So hopefully she'll be able to chime in too.
Yeah, thank you, Elise. And a lot of what you were talking about is so critical, and especially in relation to the infrastructure. We talk about, a lot of times in Vermont, we're talking about clean water, and these parks that, again, they're home to 7,000 residents throughout the state, people that are already living there. In a lot of ways, they didn't choose to not be, hooked up to a municipal sewer system. It's just a virtue of where they live. And these parks, when all of the revenue that they're generating is from lot rent, it's great that these rents are low and that it's an affordable option for people. But in the case that, as you're mentioning, a $2 million septic system comes as an immediate emergent need, and it's not accessible to state and local funding, that's a huge issue. So with that, I'll transition over to one of our other panelists, and that's Gayle Pezzo, the board president of Westbury Homeowners Association, the mobile home co-op in Colchester. And Gayle, why don't you kind of introduce yourself and share some of your perspective and what it's been like, as the president over in Westbury these past few years. And you are muted.
So my name is Gayle Pezzo, and I'm the board president at Westbury Homeowners Association. We have 250 units. We also have a building with a rental. We have 4.6 road miles and 183 acres. And I didn't know what I was signing up for when I got on this board, but my perspective is as a resident. I moved here in 2016, and I'd never lived in a mobile home community before. I saw it as affordable living. I'm retired. I had just gotten divorced. The rent was, I'm from Long Island, so that was like, what, are you kidding me? So my perspective is that as it kind of shifted once we became a co-op, because I moved in here, I was paying lot rent. Westbury, things were done. I mean, the previous owners, they did work. We didn't know then that a lot of it was Band-Aid or, a little bit of spit and polish. But once we became a co-op, I began to realize that, so our lot rent is the only revenue that we have to fix these major sewer, leach field, electrical upgrades that the inspector said. Now, remember, we have 250 units, and he's being very kind that he's not saying this needs to be done in 5 years. The park just turned 50 years old. So my focus, I started to explore what options, thinking there's grants. Remember, I don't know anything. I'm not from Vermont, and I never lived in a mobile home before. So it was kind of daunting to me that there wasn't any resources, really. There's a few grants. So I started to do some research about if our community could become a fire district. And I didn't spend a lot of time on that because I really felt like I was in the weeds. But then as talking to people outside the park, something came up about the possibility of us becoming a municipality, a village. And so becoming a village, a municipality, a subunit of the Colchester, that would open more doors. And then we might be able to use our lot rent more efficiently. And I'll use this as an example, and it's only as an example. So we pay $50,000 for winter maintenance for snow plowing. And that's the low bid. The other ones was 75 and 165. So if we took that 50,000 and that went into the village pool, and we could partner with another municipality, of course, we would want it to be Colchester, and them charge us a fee for service for the plowing. And like I said, this is only an example. Then there's a possibility to use our lot rent more efficiently. So I've been really researching this part of it, the village part of it, for about a year. And I finally went to the select board again, but on the village part of it last Tuesday. They didn't put us on the agenda. There may not have been time. But now they've invited me to the agenda with the people that I brought, which CVOEO happens to be one of them, and CDI, and an attorney. And I can't make it when they say that they can put me on the agenda. So I answered their 3 questions. Hopefully, all we were asking them, we weren't really asking for their permission, because you don't need permission from the town. We were asking if they would provide us a select board member or a staff member to work on the charter as a collaboration. I'm not sure if they don't understand the prospect, or they're just kind of kicking the ball down the road. Either way, I'm in it this far. I might as well, like 3 years in, you might as well like see it through. So at this point, that's where we're at. What we're trying to do is just find some opportunity where it isn't just lot rent increases that help us to maintain our property. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Gayle. And yeah, I there's a lot of, kind of important stuff in what you're just saying. And, where my mind goes is 2 places in particular. And that one of them being, so we've been talking about these resident-owned communities in Vermont, and I think it would be good to kind of drill into what that actually means. So as of some legislation in 1989, mobile home parks, their residents have not exactly right of first refusal to explore the purchase of their park when it goes for sale, but they have some protections that allow them to explore that option. And from 1989 up until about 2011, very few co-ops were made because it's a really difficult process. It's, to take a small handful of residents and expect them to understand the financing required to buy, multiple $1 million worth of land and houses is a pretty daunting task. So in 2011, the Cooperative Development Institute, a really great nonprofit, came into Vermont and started to help communities with the process of dealing with the finance associated with becoming a co-op. So in that time, we went from, a small number up to, I believe it's 18 as of this year. There were 2 that recently, passed the conversion in Colchester also, coincidentally. But, despite these great goals of being a more democratic way of having a community, there are still challenges that present themselves, including one of them being that once it becomes a co-op, the process of creating that finance is that they become a private for-profit institution. This is despite being set to be for community benefit. It's democratically controlled. It's not for profit. The only revenue is going in from lot rent and out towards maintenance, but they are a private institution, and as such, excluded from several of these state and local grants. So big challenge. Yeah, go ahead, Elise.
Can I just underscore, Gayle did a much more eloquent job than I did. Like, I live in Virgins, right? I take for granted that the city has a water system operator and a sewer system operator and the guy who's in charge of plowing the roads and fixing the roads, right? And the cost of all those people is spread over the 2,800 households that live in Virgins, right? But take Otter Creek Mobile Home Park down the road, actually take our whole portfolio of 9 parks, 340 units. We still have to have the person who knows how to operate actually not just 1 public water system, but 5 public water systems, knows how to maintain mostly dirt roads, that $165,000 annual cost of plowing, and knows how to fix what to do in the case of a failed septic system. We only get to spread that cost over 340 ratepayers. So I think that you can just really see how big a challenge that is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'll add 2 more points on the co-op piece before we move over to Kelly. And one of them being that, something that has been really enlightening for me in my conversations with Gayle is that, despite being connected to these private systems, every resident of all these mobile home parks pays the property taxes for the town that they're a part of. They pay the same rate of property taxes that any other homeowner would. but they get a lesser quality of service or just a lesser amount of service. There isn't municipal plowing or water or electric. And instead, they need to pay that on top of these things and often through their lot rent. And the only other piece being that with these infrastructure systems, again, we go back to these were created at a time in the 50s, 60s, when there were different understandings of what a sustainable water system would be. So we'll go into parks throughout the state and there may be 100 homes and 50 septic systems. And every one of those septic systems is an opportunity for, a potential issue to arise. So, the fact that that is matched up with a lacking access to funding really just creates this really tough spot that communities are put in, both ones that are private or nonprofitly owned, as well as co-ops. And even in this too, when a park goes for sale, and residents are exploring the potential purchase, they may know we have somewhat of like a ticking time bomb underground that within the next 5 years, yeah, our sale price is this, but it could be quadrupled in terms of the actual cost within 5 years, 1 year, or 20 years. And we just don't know, so often we just don't know. And the state is starting to recognize this and is starting to use some ARPA funding to address this. But, that, like we said, there's 230 parks and I would say less than a handful of them are municipally set up. So with that, I'll pass it over to Kelly. Kelly brings some unique perspective, from being a researcher and someone that's been in this world, for, I would say 10 years. Does 10 years sound right? Maybe a little longer.
Oh gosh, I go back to days with Elise actually, just at the start of my graduate work in 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So Kelly, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Nate. And I just want to acknowledge we've had a long-standing partnership. So my mentor, Dan Baker, who's also one of Nate's former professors, and I have been working a long time from the UVM Center for Rural Studies and the Department of Community Development and Applied Economics with the mobile home program at CVOEO. And so we've shared multiple grants together. We've with different past generations of resident organizers and directors, we've been on the ground in parks all over the state, whether doing kind of a community survey to get a sense of what people really value about their mobile homes and their park communities, to identifying some of the challenges with this form of housing, to being on the ground, a few days, even just after Tropical Storm Irene hit, and even with a park that was devastated in Berlin back in the Memorial Day flooding back in 2011. So a variety of different contexts, and it's really been a pleasure to have such an amazing resource, to be able to work alongside this amazing resource that's serving park residents across the state. The other thing I just want to underscore before I talk a little bit more about some of the things that we've been looking at in partnership with all these wonderful folks, is just the tenacity I think it takes, and that we heard in Gayle's story about seeing this transition to more resident-owned cooperatives. One of my current undergraduate students, Lindsay Parrott, is actually on the call right now, and she's been interviewing mobile home park stakeholders this past year around trying to document this incredible uptick, right, in resident-owned cooperatives that we've seen since Bunker Hill back in 2011. And the stories and the challenges and also the opportunities, right, for this form of really important rural housing stock in our state, not just our state, but elsewhere across the country as well. So a few of the, I think, key themes from my work with mobile homes. I think one of the original projects that I worked on was actually working in the town of Starksboro, working with Elise's predecessor, Terry McKnight, and the town planning commission there to really get an understanding of what issues were happening in the park as the planning commission was making different decisions around zoning and setbacks and making recommendations, but also realizing that there really wasn't representation from park residents in those meetings, and those voices weren't being heard. And so part of that work that we were able to do is brainstorm with the Planning Commission, brainstorm with Terry, and at least I believe you were in those meetings as well back in those days, to really design a survey where myself and a team of undergraduates were out in the parks talking with residents. Yes, filling out a survey form, but also just getting a real sense of what made life in these parks really special, and also some of the challenging things, and highlighting those to bring back to the town, and also to bring back to ACCT leadership. And that really spurred the development, with the support of the CVOEO mobile home program resident organizers at the time, the formation of resident associations. And those, some of those meetings that I remember really fondly from Brookside, from some of almost like a cookout, I think we had really to share back some of the survey findings. One of the most major survey findings that we found was people talking about how important it was to have their own four walls. That was really a point of pride, a sense of security for folks to be able to have control over their own space. And yet also how much they enjoyed, many folks, not all folks, enjoyed their neighbors, right? And having a sense of community, and being, having a strong sense of place, while there really was also a disconnect with town leadership. And so some of those challenges were simply, not feeling that their voices would be heard in those municipal settings, that their communities felt disconnected from the rest of the community, that social stigma really being a real challenge that folks were feeling. And so part of those early meetings, not only kind of internally getting people to talk about their shared concerns, their shared experiences, also making those connections back to the town, and being able to literally bring the town to the park as well. And so that was some of our early work. From there, we had an opportunity to write a USDA research grant to look at resilience in rural communities. And so in our work with mobile home parks, we would run into parks called Brookside, River Run, Riverside. And so the idea came up to write a 3-year research grant with a funded position at the mobile home program for some of the engagement work, to be able to explore this notion of, are mobile homes more vulnerable to natural hazards like flooding, especially in with climate change impacts, coming down, well, here actually. But that was in December of 2009 when we wrote that grant. And for those of you who were here in August of 2011, that timing felt very fateful. So we were scaling up at the time. If you were in the mobile home program office, there was a paper map up on the wall with thumbtacks literally to represent where all the parks were located. And so one of the first things we did was actually get a bunch of GIS data together and make a map where you could see all of, at the time, 245 parks across the state. The next step we did, while also supporting on the ground efforts with recovery in some parks, particularly in central Vermont, we also, a partner on the project, also looked at whatever available FEMA data we had to be able to look at floodplains in relation to where those parks are. One of our key findings from that work is that indeed mobile homes within parks do face a higher risk of being located in a hazardous area for flooding. So about 12% of mobile homes in parks are in a 500, 100 or year floodplain or a floodway. And then when we looked at single family homes that were site built, that number was only 4%. And mobile home parks on private land were about 6% in those hazardous areas. So we were able at the same time grappling with the on the ground impacts of Irene, trying to support FEMA, advocating for greater inclusion of parks and recognition of parks within the emergency management community. We were able to bring this data and these maps actually back to the table around the same time as co-ops were really gaining energy. And so a lot of that work we're actually revisiting right now to look back and say what's changed in the last 10 years in that landscape. And that's been a really interesting and dynamic experience now going back. And unfortunately, we did see some parks either close completely or convert into a different housing stock altogether. So one park, particularly in Waterbury, that was located just off the interstate, that was 11 units of mobile homes, now are about $200,000, or at least when they were built, $200,000 site-built cottages, and really out of reach for the folks who were living in that park the day before Irene. And so it really, to me, when I'm thinking about mobile home parks and the opportunities here, this is our largest unsubsidized affordable housing stock in our state. And it also has a lot of, gives folks, literally their own four walls. And there's a lot of good things with that. And really respecting those choices and the benefits of that is something that I think we're always trying to advocate for, while we're also holding at the same time the complicated challenges or the complexities of all the things that Elise and Gayle have also mentioned regarding infrastructure and the need for greater investment. And so I think that's something that we're really trying to do here with our work is really amplify resident voices and experiences, support our partners on the ground, and also provide data that can help park owners like Elise and Gayle, make decisions about where to invest in and hopefully inform other decisions that come up down the road. So I think I'll pause there and we'll move on.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing this perspective and your unique perspectives. And I will make a plug for any folks who have questions. You can pop them in the chat or use the raise hand function on Zoom in order to do that. And it looks like we have a question coming in from Anthony. And just before I get that, just so that I can actually read it, I'll pose one question of my own, and it's kind of based off of what Kelly was saying, in that we've talked a lot about the challenges so far, and that's a lot of times the way we frame these conversations about the issues. But in my experience going into these parks, there is a lot of success and there is a lot of joy and there is a lot of community. So I think it would be great, if each of you could kind of talk about some of the great opportunities that exist in the mobile home parks, or some of the factors that really, do kind of set these communities apart. So would anybody like to take that up? Primarily, Kelly was kind of answering that in the home ownership piece, but
I will just say, so John, I don't know if anyone from Bunker Hill is on the call, but the experience of watching that park come together in the face of, they had a nonprofit owner that was merging with another nonprofit. The park wasn't going to be transferred in that sense. And so the park residents were issued a closure notice, and their only option was to become a resident-owned cooperative. I think in addition to their own individual homes, that sense of community within that park was so strong. I remember going to the initial park meeting, I think with Sean Gilpin and Sarah Woodward, and there was a staff member from VHCB and Arthur Hamlin. And we were in this building in downtown Windsor, and somebody had a flip chart. And it was very clear that there was no other nonprofit park owner that was coming to the table. It didn't seem like there were any private buyers interested in the park as well. And so they were facing a pretty stark, bridge or fork in the road. And as soon as the potential for a co-op, which at that point had been probably about 20 years or so since the last park had formed, or transitioned to resident-owned cooperative, they just set right to work with having us map out on a flip chart. Somewhere on my desk, it's very messy right now at this point in the semester, but there's a picture of that flip chart in terms of the to-do list, in terms of how to get organized, identifying leaders, finding the technical assistance providers, and what they needed to do. And I think that being able to witness that spark, and really hear people articulate why their community was so important to fight for, and knowing it was going to be an uphill battle was really inspirational for me as a young on the ground researcher at that moment in time. And I've had the opportunity to go back to that park. We've done some emergency park planning workshops. We actually, I think, held with the assistance of Vermont Emergency Management. We actually did an emergency park plan, and they were included in the statewide catastrophic exercise back in 2014. I think we had a pretty epic potluck celebration after that. And just, yeah, really positive memories from that experience when things, they were in a really difficult place at that moment in time, but they just really took it and ran with it with the support of course, many partners, but yeah, fighting for their community.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. I like the idea of an epic potluck. That's so we can get there in our kind of community engagement. Elise and Gayle, any other thoughts on some of the opportunities in the mobile home communities in the state?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is related to what Kelly already said about the community there, and just like witnessing random acts of kindness, like that, older woman who lives in that house and, can't mow her lawn anymore, and a neighbor just comes over and does it without being asked. And the other, kind of broader opportunities with the workforce housing shortage that Vermont is facing right now. I'm just, the people who live in the parks that are coming to mind, people on fixed incomes with, rent skyrocketing, and they can actually have a more stable housing cost in a mobile home park, largely thanks to the statute that limits the annual increase in lot rents. To people, a woman who drives a school bus, a gentleman who works as an IT consultant at a school in Colchester, like the jobs that Vermont can't fill because people can't afford to live here. A lot of the folks who are doing those jobs are living in our mobile home parks.
Yeah, that is definitely a really important piece. And Gayle, I'll pass it to you too.
So what I really noticed was in the beginning of COVID, and what I see as a co-op, and because we have committees and we have a board, I saw a camaraderie and I saw people step up where I don't know if they would have before. We're only 3 years old that we're a co-op. But there were people offering, rides to people, or if they were frightened to go into the stores, we have a committee that pulled together some resources to be able to do that for people. So that's where I see the positive, is that in the community, there is, you always have those handful of, they're not going to join or be involved at all. But for the most part, the majority of people are good neighbors, and they have pride in their community and their homes. And when we're talking about the resources, if all that you have generating to come in to pay your lot rent and your bills, and there's nothing left over to really maintain your home, that's how they get run down, and people start to lose enthusiasm because there's no options for them. But as a whole, I see it as people banding together to help each other, and it's a great thing.
Yeah, definitely. The community pride is an important thing, and that is especially true in some of the co-ops. Mm-hmm. But the point that you were kind of making before, or right before that, was what's a good way to put it? Feeling like overwhelmed by the magnitude of the issues that a lot of homeowners feel. And this will kind of transition into the question that Anthony asked, and that is, outside of infrastructure, what are some of the major challenges in these communities? And I can just start by, putting together one point, and that is, I started out by saying that there are 7,000 households in mobile home parks throughout the state. The Mobile Home Program, which is the main resident support organization, is currently 3 people. We have 3 people for the whole state, from the Northeast Kingdom to Bennington, and we're based in Burlington. So inherently, we are fighting some pretty monumental odds. Mm-hmm. And we do what we can to make sure we're getting to all of these corners of the state. But in 2019, we had 1 person on the Mobile Home Program. So the odds are against us to a degree, but we do our best, and we try and make sure that we're getting to all these parks and really distilling down some of this really heady information that can be coming from so many different places of there's this grant and this grant and this grant and this grant, and this is your responsibility and this is the park owner's responsibility. It's really challenging. I mean, the fact that, we have jobs is a sign that the system is hard to understand. So that is certainly one additional challenge of just the level of support that exists, primarily for, a demographic of older people who are in older homes that are aging, which I'm sure that'll come up as one of the challenges. So I guess I'll just pass it back to the panel. Anybody would like to touch on some additional challenges of mobile home parks? So we have a hand raised from Chris. I know Chris is, from ACCT. I would, I'll defer to our panel first, and if anybody would like to.
I cede my time to Chris.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm just gonna add on before I think we get into the really great specifics with Chris. I just want to say, when I'm talking with folks across the country about mobile home parks, we are so fortunate to actually know where our mobile home parks are and know who the owners are and know what the lot rents are because of the registry that Arthur Hamlin at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development manages, and being able to track that data. One of the things I often tell my students is we measure what matters. And so the fact that we have that data to work with and be able to track and know where folks are is a really a huge asset for us. Immediately after Irene, I remember being around some long-term recovery committee, table meetings, and basically, we had the mobile home park addresses, and we knew how many parks and knew how many households. But when folks were asking about rentals and folks who are in, rental units within the community, that we don't have that akin piece of data set. And so that was really illuminating, and really for me in that moment really drove home the importance of that registry that lives up on the ACCD website, but it really made a difference on the ground in that way, and then also being able to track the trends and what's happening right now.
Yeah, I'll give some big kudos to Arthur Hamlin at the DHCD. He was unable to join today because he was feeling under the weather. But I mean, again, talking about capacity, it's the three of us as the resident support and one person in all of the state government for all of these mobile homes. So we're great that he's good, but
Yes.
Chris, I'll pass it over to you to kind of touch on some of this stuff.
Yeah, I think, kind of answering Anthony's question, working in the mobile home parks and with the residents that we have, I think the biggest obstacle that I see with a lot of our residents, as Elise mentioned, is we have a lot of residents that are on fixed incomes, that are retired, or are the working class, where, there's not a ton of money available to them. And being able to upgrade a home that's from the 60s and 70s is just not realistic for them. They can't afford the down payment. They can't afford the mortgage payment and lot rent. So it's really challenging for a lot of our, there's parks that have homes that were there when they started back in the 60s. And I actually was just in one the other day. The lady called me into her home and said, I need you to come and see where I'm living. And I was like, okay. And I walked in, and she's got Ziploc bags hanging from her ceiling, catching the water that's coming through her roof, because she can't afford to fix it. And even if she did, she's like, my home is so old, it's from the 60s. Nobody will fix it because it's not worth what they're going to put into it to fix it. But I have no other options. I can't afford $1,000 a month for a rent payment. So, the challenge is the cost of upgrading a home, or even making their home more energy efficient, because nobody's certainly going to put solar panels on a roof that's that old. And make it for more affordable for the resident to live there. I think when we're talking about, residents finding financing, that's also another challenge, is finding lenders that are going to loan on mobile homes. I have a home that's for sale in Lindale today. I reached out to one of my approved applicants that I know would be able to afford to purchase this home and would be able to afford a mortgage payment and the lot rent, and his bank will not loan on a mobile home. And this is the bank he's been dealing with. This gentleman's in his 60s. He's been dealing with this bank for 40 years, and they won't loan money on the home. So he's totally dismissed going anywhere else to find somebody to fund it. But so that would be the biggest, I think, issue that I see with our residents, is just being able to afford to upgrade their homes. And finding the money. I know CVOEO has a lot of really good programs, but then you also run into those middle income people that are just over the income guidelines and don't qualify for anything. And then can't afford to maintain their home. They're making their payments, their vehicles, their home insurance, their health insurance, their daycare, all of those expenses, and they have no money left. So that's where I see a lot of issues. But yeah, if anybody else wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I think I would like to echo just kind of some of what you were saying, and looking at some of the numbers in the slide that Chris had up. When we talk about fixed income, these are very common in terms of the mobile home landscape. And this can be someone that their whole entire monthly income will be $1,000, right, or $1,200. And if you look at the sample budget, just the cost of living might be $1,100. To be left with $100 for a rainy day fund, should your roof go or your water furnace or water heater blow, you're in a really tough spot. And a lot of these people have been Vermonters their whole life. They've been living in this community for so many years. They've been a homeowner, and suddenly, their home that they've been in is more of a burden than than they can really stand. And it's a really tough spot without, there are opportunities to buy new mobile homes and get some assistance with that. But again, a lot of these people that are on a fixed income can't take a $100,000, mortgage out on a new home. It's just not viable. So.
Yeah. And when you're talking about somebody that has $800 a month, and I mean, the $1,000 is awesome, but this particular woman that's got the baggies hanging from her ceiling, her income is $800 a month. That's what she has. And there is absolutely no way in the world she would be able to afford even maybe purchasing a used home if she could find one. And she doesn't own a vehicle, so she has no car payment. And she needs to be within walking distance of things. So that eliminates a lot of our mobile home parks because they're not walking distance to a grocery store or a drugstore or a bank or, any of that. So, it limits her ability of where she can live.
Yeah.
And Chris is only one person with a very big job. What ACCT, I know we're out of time, but just what we're trying to do to move the needle on this, we started a family support program a year ago so that Chris at least has someone to refer somebody like this to, so they can help them work through this really complex process. But we have one family support coordinator who also is serving our 334 apartment residents. So, that would be like a caseload of 750 for her. So we just need way more resources. Like Nate was saying, only 3 people to serve the state is not enough if we really want, all of these wonderful programs that are out there through RD and the information that's out there on CVOEO's website. We actually want to increase take-ups beyond maybe one person a year in a mobile home park and with ACCT is able to replace their home or do a home repair loan. We're gonna have to invest in helping people access these programs is I think really what we need to do on that front.
Yeah, and just looking at the time, I'll pass over to Gayle for one other kind of thought. We are a little bit past, but that's okay. It's been a great conversation. And before I do, I popped a document into the chat. And that is a flyer for some additional upcoming mobile home program work, specifically for mobile home residents. So to kind of continue reaching people and continue, making sure that people know about the resources available. We're going to be doing we're calling it a statewide training with 2 opportunities for folks to join, where they are able to kind of learn about the services that we offer, the financial assistance that's currently available, and also to see that, a lot of what we've talked about today, yes, there are situations in specific parks, but they are very generalizable. So, showing that, the problems you might be facing are, the same as the park next door, or the park 3 towns over, and maybe we can find some solutions collectively that work together. So that's kind of the goal of those 2 trainings. One of them is going to be on Wednesday, May 4th, and the other is Saturday, May 7th. And all participating mobile home households that do attend are going to get a $40 thank you gift card for attending. So we really are trying to get some good attendance there. And we're going to really start marketing that next week.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll pass it over to Gayle for any last words, and then Corinne will wrap us up after that.
So the one thing that I looked at was that that stigma about mobile homes and living in a mobile home. It's there, it's present, it's alive and well. But the one thing that I noticed in the last couple of years is that people such as yourself are not calling it mobile home parks.
Oh no, she froze.
Anymore, or trailer parks, you're referring. And I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it's a baby step, but I think it makes all the difference, because that trailer park, it affects anyone that lives, and we hate it. So thank you, whoever has been using that. I see it a lot, and I just, from me personally, want to thank you.
Yeah, Gayle, you cut out when the specific term you were using. So you wanted to say the better than, worse than terms?
I think mobile home community, I mean, we all refer to it as a park. It is a park. But when you start calling it, it's lessened that people are calling it trailer park.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of transitioned to mobile home park. And now I see MHC a lot for mobile home community. Those little things make a difference. They make a tremendous difference when the conversation is toward everyone. When you stop using a negative connotation, then that's how we make success and progress with it not being viewed that way anymore. Unless you put something on TV and you see that regular trailer park with the wife beater, but there's nothing you could do about that. There's got to be, there's got to be some distinction. I'm just appreciative that people are looking at it differently, or beginning to look at it differently.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow, what a great note to end on, Gayle. Mobile home community, I love it. And I do have to quickly say, before I close us out, thank you to our partners that have allowed us to do this work. I'm hoping that I'm sharing the right screen at this point in time.
Yes, you are.
Now I will stop sharing. And thank you to our panelists. This was an amazing conversation. It truly brought some tears to my eyes in certain points. And I know we could have spoken for a whole other hour. And, I'm really hoping that we can find some opportunities in the future to continue this conversation, because obviously there's a lot there. And it just, we're just scraping the surface with some of the topics we covered today. So thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Gayle. Thank you, Chris, honorary panelists. And thank you, Nate, for facilitating this conversation today.
Yeah, and this is my last plug. Any folks who may be a mobile home resident or know some mobile home residents, pass this on, send me an email, nlantieri@cvoeo.org. What's our email address? And we can answer any questions so that folks can get in that attendance.
And we will be sending follow-up emails with all of the resources we covered today. So don't you worry, if you were registered for this event, you'll be getting the information. And panelists, if you have anything that you want us to add, you know how to contact us.
Thank you.
All right, everyone go get that sunshine while we have it. Thank you, everyone.
Is it sunny out? I can't tell. I'm in a concrete box.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, everybody,
Thanks.
for attending. Panelists, this was great.
Take care.
Quick hour. All right.
Oh.
How'd it go, Corinne?